Um, Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our virtual panel discussion entitled Innovative HR Tech Supporting the Employee Experience. My name is John Dinkle, founder and CEO of Dinkle Business Development, and will be moderating the panel today. So for the next hour, we'll be joined by four leading experts to discuss the very important topic of how HR tech is supporting employee engagement, experience, and culture, especially in this crazy time of transition that we're still going through even after a year. In a moment, I'll ask each panelist to introduce themselves, but first, just a couple of housekeeping notes. All attendees are on mute. I'm going to ask that you use the Q&A feature to post any questions that you have for our panelists, and we will try to get to as many of those as possible during the Q&A session. Also, feel free to use the chat room to communicate with fellow attendees and the panel. Want to keep this as interactive as possible. If the webinar goes down, it's still technology, just log right back in. Get right back in. And lastly, thank you for attending. We really appreciate you being here, especially on such a nice day like this. So now I'd like to have our panelists introduce themselves. And we're going to do this a little bit differently. And I'm going to start with Lisa First Willis, the CEO of Trevelop. So Lisa, instead of just asking about your background and your school and all that fun stuff, we can get that on LinkedIn. What I'd like to ask you is, what led you to your current role, and why are you passionate about what you do?
Great question. Great start, John. Thank you so much for having me today. Very excited to be here with some of my favorite people. So my name is Lisa First Willis, as John mentioned. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Trevelop, and I spent the last 25 years in HR, which ultimately led me down the HR tech path. At Trevelop, and for me personally, we are very passionate about improving manager and employee relationships. Our HR technology provides companies with a modern approach and an efficient, easy way to manage employee performance and development through continuous evaluation and feedback. And having the background that I do, that has always inspired me to get right down into how that manager and employee relationship works.
Awesome. Thank you, Lisa. Appreciate that. It's great seeing you, and thanks for being here.
Thanks, John.
Our next guest is Emily Plahansky, Director of Strategic Partnerships at SIG, an Alera Group company. So Emily, I'd like to ask you the same question. What led you to your current role, and why are you so passionate about what you do?
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm really honored to be amongst this amazing panel today. So again, like John mentioned, my name is Emily Plahansky. I currently work for SIG, an employee benefits broker. We help businesses navigate a very complex healthcare benefits space, and we do so in a very intentional, focused way on employee well-being. And I would say I've had an amazing opportunity over the last decade to work alongside of companies and leaders, helping them to really understand what lights up their people. And so I really feel very passionate about employee engagement and making sure that people are really seen as their whole selves for their unique behaviors, what motivates them, what gets them excited. And so I was really led down this path after working for several recruitment firms and consulting practices. And so I recognized that hiring was done really poorly, and employers were not really recognizing that their brand was really rooted in the employee experience they were creating. So I'm really grateful I get to help work today with businesses around the whole employee experience around benefits and help enable that experience with employers that want to design benefit plans to meet the needs of where their employees are today. So that's really what gets me excited.
Awesome. I love it. Thank you. Appreciate you being here. It's good seeing you. Our next guest is Tim Guinan, co-founder of GiveHero. So Tim, what led you to your current role, and why are you passionate about what you do?
Yeah, thanks, John. And it's great to be here with all these fantastic panelists and experts in the space. I got here a little bit differently. So I actually grew up in a hospitality house in downtown Washington, D.C. My parents founded multiple different nonprofit organizations serving the poor and homeless. And some of them you might recognize, the Community for Creative Nonviolence. And so that was really the foundation for my career. So I spent time working in the nonprofit space, working with all sorts of different organizations, doing great work, different missions, And really, that's an extension of the work that I'm doing now with Give Hero. And Give Hero, our mission is really to inspire and motivate healthy behaviors so individuals can improve their lives in their communities. And so Give Hero is a wellness and reward platform. And we basically, your healthy behaviors earn you donation dollars and donation rewards to the charities that inspire you. So that's really my purpose, and that's kind of my why.
Awesome. Thanks, Tim. Appreciate you sharing that. It's good seeing you. All right, and last but certainly not least, Gideon Taub, CEO of Pinkaloo. So Gideon, what led you to your current role and why are you passionate about what you do?
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, John. Appreciate the chance to join here. As John said, founder and CEO of Pinkaloo. We were actually recently acquired by Ren PSG, the leader in philanthropy services and technology, to continue building our vision, which really started about 5 years ago as two experiences that I personally had right around the same time came together. And so the first one was, prior to this, I spent 10 years at a technology startup called Videology based in Baltimore. And towards the end of my tenure there, we were starting to lose employees to some larger, more established tech companies nationwide, not only locally. And as we were doing exit interviews, one of the reasons that kept coming up over and over again was a much more comprehensive set of perks and benefits, including workplace giving or volunteer opportunities or community give back being the reasons that folks were looking for new roles. And I realized at that point that there was not only an opportunity, but also a need to democratize some of those programs and allow companies of all sizes to be able to offer them to their employees and to engage their employees in new ways, and that no longer could be something that only the largest companies and institutions in each community could offer. And then secondly, around the same time, I was personally working on my own taxes. I got to the section around donations, and I'd just been far less generous the previous year than I'd thought I'd been or that I'd wanted to have been. And for me, I didn't have the right tools to budget for my giving or to find local organizations that aligned with my passions. And so I just hadn't give. And so after a whole bunch of conversations, I realized that there was way too much friction in giving and an inability for companies who wanted to be engaging their employees in new ways to solve those things. And I looked at how I had a retirement account, a health savings account, a 529, and I thought to myself, why don't I have a similar tool for managing my giving? And why don't companies that are looking to engage employees in new ways have an easy, scalable, technology-based way to do that? And so really brought those together. And as I said, with this acquisition, we just have more resources to continue doing this at a bigger and bigger scale, which is super exciting.
It's great. That's a good story. Yeah, thank you, Gideon. Appreciate sharing that. And thank you all again for joining us today. We really appreciate it. So before we get started with the first question, I'd like to do a poll. So I'm going to put up a poll right now. And the question is, what's the biggest challenge that you have in HR tech? Is it implementation? Is it employee adoption? Is it budget? Is it all of the above? I'll give everybody a couple seconds to answer. Just kind of curious. Just give us a little bit of pretext too of what we're going to talk about today. All right, so I'm going to share the results. All right, pretty interesting. Yeah, all of the above is a popular one. There's a lot of things in implementation. Obviously, employee adoption is a big one. Budget, it's great. Thank you. I appreciate everyone participating in that. Take that down. And so let's get started with the panel discussion. Thanks everybody for participating in that poll. So the first question I have, and this is more of a kind of a broader question, I think will help set the tone for the whole conversation. And I'd like to ask each of you, how would you define employee experience? And so Lisa, I'm gonna kick this one off with you.
Sure. Thanks, Sean. So I thought it would be helpful to define what the employee experience is not and how it's different for an employee engagement. So because a lot of people say engagement and mean experience, or they say experience and mean engagement. So the employee experience, in my opinion, is how your employment makes you feel along your journey. So it's your connection to an employer. I would say from the time that you are recruited, you start on your first day, ultimately to the time that you exit and you're offboarded. So in other words, it's what an employee encounters during that journey, what they observe over the course of their tenure with a particular organization, And that's different from employee engagement in that employee engagement is the measurement of the relationship between employees and an organization. So there's a very important difference between the two, which I thought I would share.
Okay, great. Thanks, Lisa. Appreciate you sharing that. Emily, how about yourself?
First, I have to comment. I think it's awesome that Lisa was like, I'm going to tell you what it's not. That's like so awesome because it is helpful. And I do think that that's a common misperception, right, Lisa? Like, you know, what's the, are they interchangeable? Are they not? At what point? So I think that, thank you. So I would say that it's a person's perception about his or her or their journey all along the touch points at a particular company. So really piggybacking off of Lisa, you know, I would really focus on that keyword being it's a person's perception.
Great, thank you. Tim, how about you? Any thoughts there?
Yeah, what comes to mind for me is really the employee life cycle. So, you know, Lisa mentioned it from recruiting to onboarding, all the way through development and exit. You know, that's really the employee experience. And I think about, you know, going through the pandemic, everyone's really familiar with the customer experience, right? Whether it's dealing with Amazon or maybe ordering some food or dinner or what have you, have that experience. And whether it's on the customer side or the employee side, it's really about how does that experience make you feel? Do you feel valued? And that's really what I think. That's the connection between the employee experience and that value component.
Great, thanks. Appreciate that input. And Gibby, any other thoughts you have?
Yeah, I mean, I really liked Emily's point around perspective and perception. And I think I always like to look at it through the lens of, in many of our workplaces now, we have 4 different generations in the workplace, and realizing that each of them are bringing their own experiences, their own expectations into it. And as folks think through this, trying to do their best to keep in mind those 4 different perspectives from your youngest, you know, Gen Z employees to potentially, you know, baby boomers and older folks who you might still have in your workplace as well, and trying to make sure that you're meeting each of them where they are, which I know can be daunting, but is important to consider depending on the makeup of your staffs.
It's great, and that actually brings up something. Or is there a part in the employee life cycle from kind of hire to when they leave the company that's more important than the other when it comes to employee experience? Is it better that they have an experience like really good at first, good onboarding, all that, and then not, you know, it doesn't matter on the exit side? Or is there a part of the employee life cycle that's more important than the other? Would you say?
I can speak to this a little bit. I would say that it's equally as important how you onboard them as how you offboard them. When they leave your company, they're saying something. And so that's very much a part of the brand and the story that they're telling the marketplace. And so I think it's as critical from the start of that first interaction with even a recruiter on your team or an extension of your team, right? Like I was in the recruitment business and I was a third-party vendor recruiting folks onto other companies, and the experience that those candidates had with me as a recruiter was a reflection of the brand of the company I was representing. So I would say equally as important through the life cycle, including offboarding.
Yeah, I've had some experience with that. Going back to my management days and when I was still learning, and up to many years into it, where when somebody leaves the organization and it's maybe just not a good fit, but they leave in a not great way, and you don't want that. You almost want them to understand that it's okay to leave and it's not a good fit. We all understand each other and we part as friends, but. So yeah, I agree with that. I think the beginning is just as important as the end, because people are then going to obviously talk about you once you leave the organization. And yeah, it's good. Any other feedback around that?
John, I'll jump in on this one too. I think where a lot of times the employee may get lost along the way is in the middle, right? Yeah. You're showing up every day, you're doing a great job, you're through onboarding, and then you kind of go into that comfort zone. Yeah. Could be like the middle of the first year, maybe you're going into the second year, but really one of the ways that you can help engage that middle time of the journey is to make sure that that employee knows that they're valued, that you are on a professional development journey with that team member. That's important too. But just reconnecting and making sure that you're reconnecting with all of your employees, not just the newbies and the ones who are, the long termers. But those are definitely ones that tend to get lost sometimes in the
Yeah.
middle.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, especially if you have long-term employees, right? It's hard to it's hard. You have to focus as a manager to make sure that you have a good experience through the whole process. So that's good. And
I
since
would
sorry, go ahead, Emily.
Sorry, John, I was going to make a comment too, because that just probed my thinking that I don't know the exact statistic off the top of my head, but Lisa, you talk about like those middle timers. The highest rate of turnover is typically between 2 and 4 years. So like lower, anywhere after that first to second year is like a really critical time period to really be very focused on the employee experience. And so you have to really look at that and who's in that bucket and be very intentional. So I just wanted to make mention of that, and I'm glad you said that and brought that up.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. Thanks. Thanks for the feedback there. All right, so Lisa, my second question, I'm going to direct this one towards you. So as an HR professional with your own HR tech startup, what changes are you seeing out there and how companies are engaging their teams, and what kind of HR tech is helping companies with that change?
Sure. Thanks, John. So I love, as Emily mentioned, I really like to talk about statistics a lot. And when I was thinking about this question specifically and some of the changes and the challenges that employers have faced over the last 12 months, especially, it's been all around the pandemic. And, the remote hybrid nature of work. Am I going back in the fall? Are we not going back? Are we staying remote through the end of the year? And then what about all those employers who were part of the front line, like in healthcare and essential services? So a lot of crazy changes in the workplace over the last 12 months now, right? Here was an interesting stat I pulled last night when I was preparing for the panel today. A recent survey by Gartner found that 88% of business organizations all over the world, not just in the US, encouraged their employees to work from home or mandated it during the pandemic. 88%, that's crazy.
Yeah, that's a lot.
In my opinion, it didn't just impact a part of the country or that part, it was across the globe, right? So very, very big impact. And then the other stat, excuse me, I pulled this morning, more than 26 million Americans, about 16% of the total workforce, now work remotely at least part of the time. And this was a big shift for a lot of organizations that have been around for a long time, a lot of organizations that, were traditionally in office, for them to actually adopt and change to, we're going to allow employees to work from home, when before, John, you and I are old enough to remember, not Emily, she's too young to remember this in the workplace. Tim and Gideon, I'll kind of say they're in the middle. But you and I certainly remember that the way that you were evaluated in the workplace was by how late you stayed. And you had to be there at the end of the day. You never wanted to leave before the boss, right?
Right.
So it was really important that you were there and that you were present. And that's definitely shifted over the last 12 months. And that's no doubt has had an impact for a lot of companies as they rethink their culture. They're looking at the employee experience from beginning to end and how to adapt that to a remote model or a hybrid model. And they're also looking at how that then impacts and drives engagement. So kind of looking at those statistics and what I'm seeing, these changes in the workplace have had an impact, in my opinion, on 3 key areas that directly affect the employee experience. And granted, this is a little self-serving because of, Pinkaloo, Give Hero, and also Trevella being on this call, but the statistics are there to support this. The first impact and challenge has been around an employee's sense of belonging, their sense of community, and that has a direct cultural impact with all those changes over the last 12 months. The second area that's directly impacted by remote, hybrid, all these different models, of course, is employee health and well-being. How do you manage a health and well-being program? And what are all the impacts that have happened over the last 12 months with mental health and how remote work affects your physical fitness and all of that? And then lastly, how have all these changes affected the manager and the employee relationship? that talk about a challenge. I used to be able to walk down the hallway and have a conversation with you, and you can read people's body language and how they're doing, and you can, really respond to that. That shift to remote and being able to bring everybody together and still complete a project, even though you're not in the same room. A lot of big challenges have been associated with that. So I want to make sure that I mention that one too. And just the way in which we communicate and interact with one another, all of those things have changed.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and just real quickly, for the rest of you, I mean, you all had your hands in HR and human capital. Any commentary there about what you're seeing as well?
I would just make mention too of the fact that more than 3 million women have left the workforce since the start of the pandemic. I mean, just thinking about like the actual changes of like just the status of our world right now, and the inequalities going on in our systems, and just there's so much that has happened in a year, and the stress and the level of pressure people feel. And then I kind of go back to that stat being women, right? Of, do I go back to the workforce now that things are opening up? Are my priorities shifting? I think I would be surprised if not all of the attendees on the call were questioning like what's really important to me in my life, and then what's really important in my work, like what's really going to make a difference when I go in, and how I want to spend my time. And I think that's really going to impact, if it hasn't already, the decisions that people make as it relates to, like, I'll call it return to work. People have been back at work, so it's like a tough thing to say, but that would be my comment.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no, and I'd even jump in. I think the lens that we look at it through is, and certainly this was a trend before the pandemic and more so since, is people wondering, questioning, what is my purpose within the company, and my role, how does that specifically help the company achieve its goals? And then related to that, on a more macro level, what's the company's purpose in the wider community, in culture as a whole, and wanting to align with workplaces that they have clear answers to both of those, where they feel like their work has value in the company achieving its goals and being successful, and understanding the role that the company plays in the larger society.
That's great. Thank you. All right, I'm going to jump to the next question. Appreciate that. So Emily, I want to direct this one towards you. So as a consultant, what do you see employees looking for from their employers as it relates to like benefits and employee experience?
Sure. So I would say SIG sits in a unique spot. I get to sit in a unique spot because we're operating as a consultant, seeing different companies and different industries and different cultures, and really understanding what their employees need as a benefit and benefit offerings that truly keep them engaged. And I would say today, in today's world, and certainly I would say there's a lot of what Gideon mentioned around generation two. People want a unique experience. They want to customize their own experience. And that is really no different as it relates to their benefit offerings, and making sure that they have the ability to connect on different levels with different things. So when I think of the world and well-being, I think of physical well-being for sure, but I also think of mental well-being. I think of community well-being, like what's the impact I'm making in the world. I think of financial well-being. There's so many social well-being, community. There's so many different areas in well-being. And, I would say that employees at an individual level want the opportunity to customize that experience, and what they expect from their healthcare experience and their experience within the company is really shifted. And I've witnessed just in our world, even in the last 12 months, just a boom in what I'd consider voluntary benefits. So options for people to enroll in different things. We have a lot of companies asking for pet insurance. Like, if you're thinking on this call, who got a pet during the pandemic? If you ask that on a few of your calls, you're going to have a lot of hands raised. People, have just shifted what they're buying, what they're saying. Gideon, you did. That's awesome. Okay, we can unpack that. I didn't know that. I swear that wasn't like a play. Like, we didn't plan this.
He was waiting to raise the hand. I mean,
he was. But I would say that helping meet the needs and the priorities of the workforce during this time is so critical. And we're seeing a spike in pet insurance, elder care, student loan programs, contributions to emergency funds for individuals, identity theft, legal. I mean, I could go on and on about these extras, if you will, as it relates to making sure that employees' benefits package are whole and meeting them where they are as individuals. And I would say most notably, employees are really looking for ways to give back in their communities, and they want to ensure that their employers are doing the same. And so more times than not over the last 12 months, I've been asked to come in and give a presentation on community-based programs and how that could fit into their benefits programs. So really critical. And that's why I felt like today, just hearing from these amazing firms as to what they're doing to really support that experience is really important and really impactful.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point you bring up too. And I imagine the challenge of having all those different, kind of lifestyle benefits is maybe out of 100 people, only 10 people have dogs. So, you have to manage that one, right? The pet insurance, but then you have 10 people that might want to help pay off their student loan. So there are other platforms out there that are doing it all together, like Bonusly or Fringe or things like that, right?
And I would actually encourage you to, so the people that are listening to this call and thinking that, because John, you're so right, it can be an overwhelming thought to manage all of those vendor relationships.
Yeah.
But what I would really question the panelists here on is like their integration and what that looks like with a lot of major, I know that several of them integrate with different platforms that can be run through programs they already have in place, whether that's their payroll system or any other API integrations that they may have. But I would say from a benefit side, we make it really easy to help them integrate these really amazing platforms that they have so that their employees have a really streamlined experience when they are having an opportunity to customize their benefits and what's important to them.
Great point. Yeah. Would anybody else like to kind of comment on that question around kind of benefits? And
I think I'll just add a little bit there to what Emily said is that, we're seeing that, the groups that we work with our clients offer all sorts of different benefits, right? To meet, just like you said, some of the employees have pets and want to support their pets.
Mm-hmm.
Other of them have growing families and need support with their families. So being able to provide a varied list of benefits is really attractive and adds to the employee experience.
Yeah, that's great. Great point. Thank you. All right, Gideon, I'm going to ask you this next question here. So how are companies now thinking about community and giving back? What's changing and driving that thought process?
Yeah, I appreciate that. And just to build on Emily's last point, I do think integrations are super important. I think a lot of folks are facing platform fatigue, and beyond just single sign-on, but having to learn and roll out another platform. And so I think as folks in the audience are considering, what the next wave of solutions are, making sure that it's going to be easy, accessible, meeting employees where they are, is super important. Love platforms like Fringe. Actually, when employees that use Fringe convert their dollars to charitable funds, it's actually our platform that supports that. In terms of trying to make it easy for folks. So appreciated that shout out from the two of you there. John, bringing it back to your question, I think a trend that we've certainly seen firsthand over the last several years is, small and medium-sized businesses realizing that they need a clear story and a clear strategy around giving back and around supporting their community. However they define communities, depending on how many offices they have, what kind of footprint they have. But a meaningful learning point for me in our early days was when 3 or 4 CEOs and CFOs over a relatively short period of time relayed stories to me about their employees and candidates, oftentimes millennials, if I'm being honest, asking how the company gives back, how the company empowers employees to do so and to be their best self. And these executives were relaying, the first time or two, they sort of brushed it off. But once they started seeing a trend, they realized, oh crap, this is something that we really need to be a little bit more proactive about. And that was when I realized, that we're really onto something. And even building on that, a recent client that came on board with us out of Indiana, they ran a survey out to their employees saying what's missing from our employee engagement efforts, and giving back and supporting the community, in their case, came back as #1. And that's really what led them as a 400 employee professional services company to go out and look what solutions were out there that could really help solve that. So, I think that the trend being, and I'll drop some data points in the chat, the trend being that employees expected, and now companies are realizing that, not only do they need a solution, but there are technologies and vendors out there that make it scalable, affordable, accessible, et cetera. And then the second piece I'll jump in with, we've been amazed by the ways that we're seeing companies tie giving back into other employee engagement or employee recognition programs, and companies like Tim's and Give Hero, I think, are awesome examples of that. But even just one-offs, we've seen companies offer charitable matching funds when a current employee refers a candidate that's hired. We've seen companies tie it into peer recognition or into anniversary recognitions where they might offer some charitable funds that the employee can direct out, as well as giving them maybe a physical acknowledgement as well. We've seen companies allow employees to convert unused PTO at the end of the year into charitable dollars that they can donate to whatever charities they feel passionate about. We've seen companies offer charitable funds for winning March Madness pools. So I think, these different examples, I think, are showing that companies are realizing that their efforts need to be integrated across the company and not sort of a once per year siloed thing that people do and don't realize again, but are rather tied into how they're engaging employees on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, thank you. And getting, what differences, like if any, are you seeing between kind of the different life stages when it comes to kind of giving back in community? I mean, we have Gen Z in the workforce all the way through the baby boomers. What are you kind of seeing out there when it comes to the giving back in community?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of folks who are further along in their careers, likely have worked at a company at some point that's done a United Way program, and they're certainly very familiar with the opportunity to give back, and maybe they didn't have as many choices before, or maybe it was a piece of paper, or maybe it was their boss banging on their desk saying, we need 100% participation this year or else. But they're certainly comfortable and familiar with participating in this in the workplace environment. I think some of the changes is the younger generation want to be in control of it. They don't want 2 or 3 options where maybe the executives are on the boards of those organizations. They want to have control to say, this is what I'm passionate about, and maybe what I'm passionate about is very different than people in the sales team or people in the executive team. But my company still is empowering me to support the causes that I care about, even if it's with my own dollars. They're still providing a platform and an avenue to do that. And then I think the benefit for the companies is they get great data back around what are the causes that our employees are giving to and care about, and they can use that to inform volunteer days. They can use that to inform sponsorships in the community, corporate donations. The data is a valuable piece of it as well.
All right, thank you. Appreciate you sharing that. Yeah. Would anyone else like to piggyback or comment on what Gideon had to say?
Yeah, I'll piggyback real quick. I just want to kind of follow with what Gideon said, which is, 100%. We see kind of on our research is that across all generations, and John, you mentioned this a second ago, kind of all generations are connected to causes one way or another. And millennials, like Gideon said, really overwhelmingly connected to causes, and they're going to choose their workplace based on kind of their social responsibility efforts. So we see that every day in the organizations that we work with.
Yeah, that's great. Anyone else like to comment on that? All right, Tim, I'm going to throw this at you. So got the next question. All right, so what's the role employee well-being has as it relates to employee experience?
Yeah, so as we know, right, going through this pandemic, health and well-being is vital to everything we do every single day. It impacts all of us. And so if you just think about your day today, did you get enough sleep last night? Did you get up and did you get some exercises? Did you eat right? Did you connect with a colleague or family member? Are you worried about paying the bills? So all of these components roll into health and well-being, and employees are no different. All right, so they're dealing with the same types of challenges and priorities as it relates to ideally getting them to flourish every single day. And I think Emily, or maybe Lisa, you might have said it earlier, what we've seen during the pandemic are employees just really struggling, right, on the physical wellness, on the mental wellness. And NIH came out with 1 in 5 employees are struggling with mental health. So we know that's like this crushing burden that we've seen coming through the pandemic. And then more recently, we've heard this term languishing. And I don't know if you guys have seen
Yeah.
this, but right. So not so much flourishing. We want our employees, we want individuals to flourish, but now we're languishing. We're just kind of in that blah state. And I think, we've all probably experienced that over the last year. But the good news is employees and employers, I should say, are really taking health and well-being really seriously, just like Emily just said in the organizations she deals with. There was a great report that came out from Josh Burson and the Academy of Health and Well-being saying that basically organizations are investing heavily, more than they ever have been before, in health and well-being roles, chief well-being officers, and providing these really flexible benefits to their employees to meet them where they are. We talked about some of those benefits earlier. Emily kind of touched on those. But the question is really, how are they doing it, right? So they're doing it with technology. I mean, that's how you're going to meet this group of employees that are dispersed, whether they're remote or not. And so, using technologies, whether it's like a Give Hero supporting, health and well-being, community well-being, or an app like Headspace or Calm to support mental well-being that we're seeing a lot of organizations using. And then I mentioned kind of the family benefits earlier. Different organizations and different tools and technologies and apps trying to provide support to those working families. They've got kids at home, they've got parents at home, and how do you support them? And so employers want to be able to do that. And that's all rolled into health and well-being.
Yeah.
And we know that hey, our employees are the greatest assets we have, and their well-being is the greatest asset they have. So health and well-being plays a major role in the employee experience.
Yeah, I agree. And especially now, I mean, you bring up the topic of mental health, and we've been through the pandemic now for a year, and people dealing with working from home and being away from, their colleagues and things like that. But moving forward, now there's going to be, another wave of, having to, go back to the workplace, and maybe people like to work from home, but now they're being, kind of maybe forced to return to the office. So there's going to be, I think, another wave of kind of mental health stress and issues. So I think the well-being piece is the well-being piece of employee experience is just going to continue over the next probably year or so. I mean,
I would agree with you, John. And I would make a comment too, that I think sometimes when we as just businesses are like really thinking, like everybody on this call is really thoughtful, like we wouldn't listen in on this, right? Like we wouldn't be here if I truly believe, and I know some of the people on the attendee list that I see today, some of our clients, I know you all really care about your people, and that's why you are listening, right? And sometimes I think we try to solve problems that don't exist in some cases too. So our perception of the world is like what we live in, right? And so we sometimes project that on others. It's like, oh, it must be really hard for them, or, like there's these ideas. And I think sometimes the simplest thing that businesses can do is just survey their people, or just ask their people, like, what's important to you? What are you going through right now? How can we support you? What do you need more of? And so I'd encourage everybody on this call to really go through that process. And as it relates to back to work, return to the office, not back to work. I know we're all working. Although it's beautiful outside. So if you're not outside, it's fine. But I would say what's important to you to go return to the office, like surveying them. When are you feeling most comfortable? What are you ready? Just asking employees what their comfort level is, so that you can get ahead of like preparing to meet people where they are, and figuring out like what their new lifestyle they may want to be. We've had a lot of clients reach out to us because their employees are now in different states. They're moving. A lot of folks are moving. They're like, you know what? New York's too expensive, or I want to be in the mountains of Montana, or DC, forget it. So I just think that people are changing, and their needs are going to change. And it's really important to just kind of do a pulse survey to ask them, and then use that as a way to help with these integrations if you are considering new HR technology systems to help folks.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that. Thanks, Emily. And then Tim, you mentioned this too, from the technology side. There's a lot of technologies like Pinkaloo and Give Here and Trevelop that can help you get back and help with the well-being of your employees as you're returning to the office. So Yeah, that's a really, really good point. Would anybody
The one
else?
thing I was going to, John, the one thing I was just going to add real quick before we kind of move on was, we were defining the employee experience and talking about, do you feel valued, as an employee? And this is really the one way that employers can do that, by supporting their health and well-being, providing those flexible benefits and tools and resources. And that's really, I think, where, and getting that feedback from the surveys, Emily, do I feel valued as an employee as part of this organization?
That's a great question. And then the last caveat to that is don't survey if you're not going to do anything about it. That's what
Right. Yeah.
I worked for a consulting firm that would say that to people all the time, right? Like if you're not serious about making a change, or I wouldn't do that. And then people feel like, well, did they really hear me? Because we started this call by saying people really want to be heard right now, right? So, and that experience is important. So I do encourage you, if you do a survey, to make sure you're following up on that and communicating it. And the poll question too, I think, spoke to employee integration. So like how to get people to adopt it, you have to make them feel like it's their idea and that you're hearing what they're wanting. And so that's a really critical piece I wanted to add to this.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, because oh man, that's terrible. That'd be terrible to, like, get your employees' feedback and then not do anything about it. And that's really where the hard work begins, right, Emily? I mean,
yeah.
It's easy to push a survey out there, but it can be difficult to implement some of the ideas and get them to own those ideas and help with the implementation and all that stuff. So that's good. Appreciate that. All right, so last question I have, and this is before we get to some questions from the audience. If our audience is sourcing new HR tech, what's one piece of advice you can give them for the next time they need to buy? And Lisa, I'll start with you on that one.
Sure, thanks, John. I would say identify what the problem is that you're trying to solve. That's before you even embark on this process. What is the issue I'm trying to solve? What's the problem? Identify that clearly, and really make sure you're getting some feedback from a lot of different end users. So employees, managers, executives, if we are going to purchase HR tech, why? And what is the value add that it's going to bring? We do that a lot with our customers up front, is we specifically ask them on the very first call, what is the problem that you're trying to solve? If it's increased communication or a broken communication problem between managers and employees, okay, then let's talk about that. But it's really important to identify that up front before you even start going out there and looking at different products.
Yeah, great advice. Great advice. Thank you. Gideon, how about you? What's your advice to our audience?
Yeah, I think this comes back to the poll question you asked at the very beginning. I would say, obviously understand what the problem you're trying to solve is, understand how you're going to implement it, but also make sure that your vendor has an engagement program post-launch so that your program is going to be used, stay fresh for the subset of your population that is interested in a tool like this, like Emily was saying, that you have high confidence that they're going to come on board, use it, keep using it, and ultimately that you're getting the ROI from it. I think there's far too many that are great up until the implementation, and then you never hear from them again. So that would be one piece that I would make sure to add to the project plan.
Yeah, great advice. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Emily, how about you? What's your advice?
Goodness. I felt like I had that one ready to go in my head. And then as soon as I was just listening to you guys, I was like, wait, what was I going to say again? I would, gosh, go to Tim first. Let me think about it.
So my experience would be that you got to have support from leadership. So leadership's on board, you're going to have success, hopefully. And so you need that, whether it's leadership or the internal champion, that's really going to drive the implementation, drive the success of whatever you're going to implement, whatever HR tech you're going to use.
Okay, I'm ready now.
All right, Emily, how about you?
It's 80 degrees out, guys, and I'm next to a window. Give me a break, okay? I would say make sure you have a communication plan in place prior to launching, and make sure the partner you're working with really is on understands what that is, and you communicate that to them. Employees need to hear from the benefit side, and this is just in general life. People need to hear something 7 times, 7 different ways for it to really stick. And so make sure you really are working with that vendor one-on-one to figure out like those different channels of communicating this offering that you're going to so graciously offer to your employees through technology. So I would just say really make sure that you sit down with them and understand what communication strategies they have in place, and then what your goal is, and then who's doing the work to make sure that your employees really like can know, own, and drive whatever it is that you are trying to roll out. I think communication is key.
It's great advice. Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. All right. So I know we only have a little over 10 minutes. So we want to get to some audience questions. So I've got a question here. If you have any questions, please post them in the Q&A and we'll get to them. But the one question I have is, and it kind of relates back to the poll question, is how do you get your management team on board and engaged with new HR tech? And I'll just kind of open that up to anybody that would like to answer that.
I'm happy to jump in on that one. Again, I not to repeat what I said earlier, because that would be really lame, but understanding what the problem is that
Unless it was a really good point, Lisa, and then, you know, I mean, maybe it's worth repeating.
7 times. Emily said 7 times, so might be helpful.
No, going to your management team beforehand and as you're sourcing and helping everyone understand what the use case is for the HR technology, that's really, really important. So what's in it for me as an employee? You have to answer that question, but also what's in it for the manager? Is it going to make their lives easier? Is it going to help them be more productive? Is it going to make things more efficient? What are those key areas that you're hoping to improve as a result of implementing that technology? If you went to your managers and said, listen, this is going to make all of our lives easier. We're going to replace these manual processes using technology. That's really important because that's a more efficient process. But understanding the why, the how, and what's in it for me is really, really great from the manager's perspective.
All right, thank you. Appreciate that. Anybody else want to comment on that? All right, the other question I have is, how do you get your CEO to say yes to the expenditure?
I mean, I'll jump in. I think Lisa touched on that. You know, ultimately, I think it comes down to ROI. You know, around showing improving ROI. You know, even on a solution like ours, which is about giving back in the community. You know, it's going to lead to longer employee tenures. It's going to improve perception in the marketplace, like Emily was talking about with a great offboarding. You know, and so ultimately, you know, it's about ROI, and it's not only about deploying dollars into the community. You know, I think it's the perspective we take.
I would just piggyback on that and say, you know, in addition to the ROI, also tying into the values of the company. So especially if you're talking to CEO and leadership, where they've helped define those values and their position in the community, being able to really draw that line between the decision making and the values.
Okay, great. All right, I'm going to ask one more question, and then because we're such awesome people and it's really beautiful outside, we'll let everybody out a little bit early, maybe. All right, so unless I get a ton of questions, but the one last question I have is, how do you encourage employees to adopt new technology? They're getting thrown at stuff all the time. Like, man, it's how do you get them to adopt new technology like this?
So I'll comment on this as somebody who I'll step back. So 3 of the people on the screen are vendors, right? So like they have the answers to this. I'm like the employee that gets the technology thrown at them. So I'll tell you what works well from my perspective, and then I'd love to hear like what the professionals think. Yeah. But I think from an adoption perspective, what I've seen companies do really well is have internal champions. So I think this is something that is just undervalued. Like you really should focus on having a group of champions internally that can own some of the communication that I spoke about, but then just utilizing it. So if you have people who are always the ones who are doing that, that might get lost because it's like, oh, well, they always are on board. But really having people that you may think are tougher to get to adopt things, getting them on board, that's going to be a really powerful tool is your employees. So at SIG, we have a lot of work groups, we call them. And within those specific work groups, we have champions that help us get some of those initiatives out. But they always tie back to like our strategic vision as a company that everybody really understands. And so it makes sense. So I think from just adopting new things perspective, really make sure that you have some people behind the scenes that are like spreading that good word of like, I used this and it was easy, and or I had a really good experience with this platform, and just like making sure you're bringing that, having them bring those things up with other employees that may likely and most commonly just not want to change, and they may just feel like overwhelmed because they don't understand it. So having people to really sit down with them is important.
It's great. Great advice. Thanks, Emily. Anyone else like to comment on that?
If I can just jump in real quick, it's got to be mobile and it's got to be app based. It can't be something where you're downloading software and it's not something that you can take with you on your mobile device or your iPad. So definitely has to be mobile.
I was just going to say, Emily already mentioned it. You got to make it easy. It's got to be easy to implement, adopt, download, roll out. It's got to be easy.
I have a lot of ideas to add, but I want to let people get outside and enjoy the so, I'll leave a teaser, and then if you want some more ideas, you can reach out on LinkedIn or over email.
Sounds good. Thanks a lot, Gideon. Appreciate it. All right, so before we close out, we're gonna do one last poll questions for everyone, and we won't kind of share this one. But the question is, hold on. The question is, would you be interested in hearing from any of the panelists today? So Lisa, Emily, Gideon, Tim, just give you a couple seconds to answer that. Appreciate everybody being on this morning or today. It's so nice out.
I feel like that last poll question is a bit of a popularity contest, John.
Oh, yeah, and I'm not going to share that with you until, I'm just going to keep that all to myself, actually.
John, thanks for having us.
Oh my gosh, this was really fun. So yeah, I want to thank you all for being here. Really appreciate lending your knowledge and wisdom, and thanks to the audience. Really appreciate your participation. Now I want to put up the panelists' contact information. So if you'd like to reach out, I'll have their email addresses in just a second here. I'll share my screen. And if you'd like an introduction to any of them, I'd be more than happy to give you an introduction, obviously, as well. We did record this session too, so we'll send that around to everyone as well. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And get everybody's contact information up here. All right. Okay, there we go. So thanks everybody. I really appreciate you participating today. It was a really fun conversation as always. And thanks to our attendees for being here in this such great day. You've got 5 minutes. I gave you back 5 minutes. We're going to hang on for a couple more minutes if you want to chat and talk. But other than that, thank you and have a great day.
John, thanks for hosting. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. It was fun.
It was great being on with everybody else for sure.
This would be fun over like a happy hour. Like we would have so much fun in person, wouldn't we?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm always down for a happy hour. I mean,
yeah.
We already were meeting, Emily. We just didn't invite you.
Lisa, that was bold. I knew it. I knew it.
Oh my gosh, I'm just kidding. This was great.
It was great. Yeah, awesome. Great content in a short amount of time. I thought it was really good.
It was. Emily, you did such a great job.
Thank you.
Yeah,
that's so kind.
For sure.
I think
MVP.
You guys are the experts, and it was really great to be on with you. So it was really nice. It was just like, I think we all really flow together, and I know we each really care about our communities, and so it really makes a difference, like just talking about it, you can tell.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of passion there for sure. All right, we'll give it a couple more minutes. And if anybody is still out there, like if you have any questions or anything, feel free to do the Q&A or chat. All right, I think we're about good, you guys.
All right.
Yeah, thanks again. I guess I'll share all the information with you, and I'll have that to you tomorrow, latest.
Sounds good.
Awesome.
Thank you.
All right, see you guys.
Bye, guys.
Everybody.
Fun. Have a good time. Bye.
Week.
Bye.